recess has ended and the AdCom meeting is back in session. We're reconvened. We'll take up our next agenda item, which had been to approve the minutes from March 1st and March 3rd. And we ran into a little snafu on the getting the minutes out. So I'm going to skip over that, and they're on the agenda for Thursday.
I think you've got comments from the public on items not on the agenda too, Julie.
Thanks, Bob. Are there any comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda? Seeing none. So I did have next also on our agenda, continuation of Article GG. And now we know that that is removed from the warrant. So we don't even have to worry, Kristen, about a recommended motion of no action. It's just gone. So, but I think it was a good process to have our meeting and discussion last week. And obviously there was a lot of input and a lot of opinions. And so come back for another day. So does anyone else have anything to say about GG that wasn't already shared?
I think we owe Kristen a big attaboy for all the work she's put into this one.
Now I can stop having nightmares about speaking at town meeting because I knew this was going to be.
Well, hopefully someone doesn't get all excited about the personnel board. I can't.
I can just stress about that one.
Remember the cemetery.
Exactly. Okay, so moving on, lessons learned, GG is over. So next we're going to take up a discussion of the FY23 budget. And I have a slide presentation to show you because I wanted to just sort of go over some information with you all. So with your permission, and I am a co-host, yes?
You are now.
All right, let's see if I can pull this off. No, that's not it. Everyone see this?
Yep,
Yes.
got it.
Okay, so AdCom budget discussion. Just flip right to what we covered earlier tonight. As we discussed in our joint meeting, we have a forecast which shows the use of $3.7 million in one-time funds to balance the budget without adding any of the additional requests. And those additional requests had totaled together from the municipal and education sides $1.7 million. Does anyone have any further questions about the forecast that we went through tonight?
Shall I raise my hand?
Oh, you have a question, Bob?
I don't have a question so much as an observation that's somewhat of a follow-up from Dave's suggestion that we look at the out years. And I'm looking at a prior forecast. I guess it's the December one, where, and I think that had the additional requests still in it, because the deficits in the out years were $2 million or more higher for each of the out years with the additional requests put in. It might actually, I mean, maybe we'll have the opportunity to do this with the forecasting tools that we have when we get to the discussion of the budget. But there's obviously a direct relationship between adding amounts to the budget by way of additional adds in terms of affecting the out years and the amount of potential future overrides. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Bob. Really important point. Tina?
I think I have a really simple question. For the forecast for
2024, it assumes a 2.5% increase in the projections.
I think it was 3.
On what projections, Tina?
For our,
Salaries are at 3%, expenses are at 2
salary, okay.
for Article 6.
Salaries are at 3, okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Sue, just for clarification, that's true for all the out years? Each year grows at 3 and 2?
No, it's only for 23 and 24 because those are contracts that are already signed in effect. 25, 26, and 27, it goes down to our lovely 2.
Oh, yeah, my favorite number. Okay, great. Thanks.
Nancy?
Just to follow up on that, Sue, I thought that the recommendation that was made in the financial policy, or that we, somewhere along the way, that we agreed that we were going to start using 3.5 for forecasting and budgeting purposes. And now it seems like we're going back to 2. Did I make that up?
I think it's a
Or did that,
suggestion.
I'm sorry. I know exactly where that came out of. This is
That's what-
the task
yes.
force recommended
Yes.
that
Yes.
we in the future forecast at 3.5%. And I feel like going to 2% masks some of the horror that we're all trying to swallow here.
That will be under consideration, Nancy, when we decide to take that up. But for right now, the union contracts are up in 24, and I
I
was,
understand 24, but I'm wondering in the, in the beyond that.
yeah,
But
we
So
don't know
then-
what's gonna happen after that.
okay. And how does something like, I'm sorry, Julie, just one more
Oh,
question.
that's okay.
How does that, how exactly are we going to implement what the hardcore things like enacting fees? I can see how that happens through the warrant, but something like that, would we have to write that into the financial policy? How would we determine, how would we say that we're going to start using 3.5?
That I don't know.
Okay, interesting thing to think about.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. Andy?
Yeah, I just want Sue to clarify for me, excess overlay in the other revenue column. The overlay account is the amount that the assessors say they need for tax abatements, is that right?
Abatements and exemptions and the senior means tax exemption.
And I take it the excess overlay is that amount less what they actually paid out?
It is money that has not been paid out that the Board of Assessors vote that they will release.
Okay. So so this, for fiscal 23, they have enough in their overlay account to pay anticipated abatements, exemptions, et cetera, and pay out 620,000.
Well, most of it, if you remember, we put in an extra $500,000 for the senior means tax exemption.
Right.
Only 20 applicants, and it was like $20,000 went out of that 500,000. So out of that 620, it's 480,000 of the senior means tax that was not used for 22.
Okay. Do you happen to know what amount is in the overlay fund for 23?
For 23, I won't know that until I do the tax recap. They
The
get,
asse-
if you see down the bottom, Andy,
Yeah.
the overlay accounts, they're gonna get 850,000 in 23. Julie, can you highlight the overlay? Since you're the,
In uses,
Yes, what, this 850?
nope, this, the, in 23.
Yeah, 850 overlay uses.
Oh,
Yep.
right here.
So they're gonna get $850,000 in FY '23. On top of any residual that they have at the end of '22.
Okay.
Wait a minute. Now I'm confused. Why are we funding it that high if people aren't using it?
Well, hopefully because they figured that it was the first year for '22 that it came out. Not many people knew about it. And how they predicted is up to, I can't remember how many households could in fact go for this exemption. It came out to about $500,000.
Andy,
And-
all set?
Yeah, so that 850 is determined by the assessors? So,
No, they normally get 350 and the 500 is for the senior means tax. So
Okay.
normally they get 350,000 every year.
I see, okay. All right, now, what would you think if we gave them 750? And used the 100,000 to pay for a couple of the town administrators' additional positions?
Well, because if everybody goes for the senior means tax, we won't have enough in the overlay account to pay for them.
Yeah,
But it
No,
seems
it's
like
not-
with the excess from last year, there'd be extra, right, this year?
But people didn't know about it and people didn't apply for it. I mean, we heard that from people from the senior center. There were people who weren't really aware or understood the
But am I
exemption.
misunderstanding the 480 that's left that is added to the 5 that we're gonna add? So we'll have 980?
No, the 480, the
happened?
480 that is left is being released into the general fund. That's part of
Okay.
that 620,000 in sources that we're getting back.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Dave?
I was just going to circle back to Nancy's point. Nancy, you're talking about something near and dear to my heart. For the time being, the task forces scenarios are a really good place to look if you want to see the growth at 3.5. The scenario B grows at 3.5. The scenario C grows at 4 between 03 and 04, and then grows at 3.5 thereout. So, I mean, I certainly respect where Sue and Tom are coming from with the challenges for other factors in terms of the forecast percentage growth rates. And I guess, Sue, maybe just one thought is that as long as the task force remains in business, maybe they can be the ones that produce a document that speaks to this question if the forecast is a problem to do that. And I get it. I understand why you guys are reticent on that front. So that's just a thought. I don't know how long the task force will be around, but it'll certainly be around for another year.
Thanks, Dave. Anyone else? I think a big takeaway is when we look at this slide, you see the immediate budget deficit that FY '24 budget process begins with without adding any additional requests in FY '23 at $5.8 million. That's a number which would be recommended for an override without even adding any positions or services, which would be most likely recommended by the Education Budget Strategic Planning, or on the municipal side, addressing any of the structural deficits that currently exist. So now I'm going to take you all in a time machine. We're going to go back in time. In the next slide, we're going back to March 2020. Looking at a 5-year forecast that we looked at right before we balanced the budget, voted on the budget in March 2020, before we all went home and stayed home for a while. So the forecast here at the bottom, you can see the excess was $177,343. So what happens is that we are late in the process of the forecast. This is the final forecast. And any adjustments were made, like the health insurance number came in, any excess overlay would have been released. All the little adjustments have been made. And then at this time, actually, the ACES had recommended a budget increase amount for the education budget. And then we had left over about $177,000. So with that adjustment, or with that excess, we, in a normal year, like that year, before things got abnormal, then we would come to our budget vote night and we would see this kind of chart up on the wall. We met in person back in the good old days, and we threw this slide up on the wall, and we looked at Article 6 and things that we could adjust and add as necessary. And as you can see, we made some adjustments to the, let's see, sorry, I'm just going back to my notes. We had some extra money left over to fund additional requests, and any year advisory committee would weigh these additions carefully and only added what brought the budget into balance. And no additional requests were added using one-time funds, such as unassigned fund balance. So this is the process we went through that night 2 years ago. And you can see we added in some additional requests based on an itemized list of requests on the municipal side, which I'll go over in a minute. And then at the end, this is just sort of a reconciliation of how we started out and the adjustments that we made. For example, we had an insurance recovery of $284,500. We ended up having an excess of $190,000, which we plugged with these additional requests. And all right, I'll take you back. Sorry, I'm like getting lost in my slides. So we've already discussed FY22 and how that all changed with the pandemic, and we decided to add the 36 FTEs and funded these additions with that unassigned fund balance and federal aid funds. So now we have the FY23 budget. There will be no override to generate a source of revenue. There are no proposed cuts to what was added in FY22. So the $5 million of one-time funded additions to the FY22 budget rolled into FY23. The proposed use of the proposal is to use $3,737,509 of one-time funds to close the budget deficit for FY23. This $3.7 million is the number needed to close the gap if no additional requests are added to the FY23 budget. And this slide shows the breakdown of sources of one-time funds. We have the federal funds, the ARPA direct to this from the through the state. Then we have this new ARPA money from Plymouth County. We have the ESSER, which is funds for schools. And then we have the $1.48 million of excess unassigned fund balance. And then here on this slide, it's just another way of looking at the FY23 budget numbers. Again, this is with no additional requests. So next up, I'm going to show you a couple slides. One is the first is for educational additional requests. They're listed in.
Could you go back for one? I'm sorry, Julie, would you go back to the previous slide for just a minute?
Sure.
Okay.
By the way, I want to thank Dave for helping put together all these charts and spreadsheets and things. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So ACES will meet tomorrow night to take up this list of additional requests and talk about the education budget, and they will make a recommendation, most likely take a vote tomorrow night. So the additional request total for the education is $850,609. Then the next slide are the municipal additional requests ranked in priority by the town administrator. And the total additional request is $893,662. So the next slide is from the Sustainable Budget Task Force. It is budget scenario B. And as you recall, budget scenario B was level services, so no additional requests, with an expense growth rate of 3.5% annually, an operating override in FY24 of $5.5 million would be necessary. I mean, these numbers are a little bit different from our forecast, but you know, this was drawn up in January. So it's pretty close though. And then you can see beyond FY24, the deficits continue to grow back again. And if you read the task force comments, beyond FY25, the deficit is projected to grow to levels that would be difficult to address through the normal budget process without attracting new revenue, reducing expenditures, or requiring another override. So then in the task force, they came up with budget scenario C. And this goes fully in the opposite direction, where it adds all of the additional requests of $1.7 million on top of FY23 level services, has a growth rate of 4% in FY24, which is perhaps a more realistic historic growth rate. This scenario requires an operating override of $7.8 million in FY24. And then in this comment, the task force says this scenario produces balanced or near balanced budgets in FY23 and 24, a sizable but potentially manageable deficit in FY23 and deficits in FY26 and 27 that would be challenging to address through the normal budget process without attracting new revenue and reducing expenditures.
Enjoy, it actually got cut off, but it then says in the next line,
Sorry.
or requiring another override. That's my bad, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Thanks, Dave. So perhaps there's a path that's not a B and not a C, but somewhere in the middle, more like what we could call B+, or we can come up with something more clever than that. But can we add any positions which are critical, which need to be absolutely added this year with no other potential funding sources available, no revolving funds, no repurposing other positions? And I would ask that when you are considering adding any positions to FY23, I'd like you to remember the $5.8 million deficit that FY24 starts with. And that's just to close FY23. We need to use $1.48 million in unassigned fund balance. And remember what we had to use in unassigned fund balance to accomplish these additions. So I threw in here the slide, budget scenario B+, limited additional requests. Could we add something on the municipal side? Could we add something on the education side? You know, ACES will give a recommendation tomorrow night, so they're going to go through. And Dave has put together, I got a sneak preview, terrific presentation that will really get down into all the details of the education budget and the additional requests. So again, if no additions to FY23 budget level services, FY23 would use $1.48 million in unassigned fund balance. And just a reminder, what we used in FY22 of unassigned fund balance, $2,367,817. And then I just added on the bottom the proposed uses for unassigned fund balance. So does anyone have any questions on the slides itself, or I'll take them off? And you know, we're not taking up Article 6 tonight, which is the budget. We are going to take that officially up on Thursday, and I'm going to try to vote the budget on Thursday. We'll see how things go, but I wanted to just sort of have a discussion again tonight like we had last week. I know that the select board is going to vote on Article 6 tonight, and at some point, it would be great if we could get a text from Michelle or Tom, and they could tell us maybe sneak preview of what to expect, what they decided on. But anyway. Dave, you have a question, or you want me to take the slides off, or?
Now, keep it up just for 1 second. I was just going to point out that for anybody paying really close attention, I think Tom said that he may suggest that we, rather than have, as I've laid it out here, have it end up with 508, that he would instead try to get the remaining amount of excess fund balance back to 2. And by adding a 1.5 million back there, I think he'd take the 1.5, I think I heard him say, out of the foster and public safety facility. So if it's 1.5 and those are roughly 2/3, 1/3, then figure that the foster debt would be down to 3.7 and the public safety facility would be down to 1.8.
Yes, that's a good point for reminding us. Thanks, Dave. And I'd also like to add that when they say future offset for the debt impact, I don't have the slide in this presentation, but Dave has it in the presentation for ACES. Remember seeing the slide where we saw the spike in the taxes for the first couple of years when those projects costs hit, and it's a pretty steep spike for a couple of years. And so the idea is that you could put these unassigned fund balance amounts towards into a mitigation fund so that it would blunt the spike and make it a little bit of a softer curve. George?
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember, and Sue, help me please, but potential $2 million reserve fund transfer at the end of the year. So that would also come out of this $12 million, right?
If we need money to go into the reserve fund, yes, it would.
Okay.
But-
So then
but
we would actually, in this scenario, potentially be using full $12 million.
Unless
Or
the
more than that,
4.7
actually.
and the 2.3 go down a little bit.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Bob, do you want me to keep the slides up, or do you want me to
No, you
take them down?
you can take the slides down.
I can always put it back up. If I know how to do it. Haha. Let's see.
I'd rather look at the faces of my colleagues.
How do I stop?
Then the numbers in red. I don't blame you.
And
Up on your screen, Julie, it should say stop sharing.
I'm looking for it. Sorry, everybody. Pause share. Stop share.
There you go.
Thank you.
Hey,
Sorry.
well, I'll be really interested in hearing from Dave and ACES on the education additional requests. I do think this $1.7 million would seem to offer some kind of path forward with respect to some of those requests. I don't conceptually have any problem with parking $350,000 in the sped reserve, because that's been such a wild card over the years. And I guess I would like to perhaps get some clarification from our education colleagues as to what they're going to do with the other $1,250,000 or so, or 350, whatever the math is. And you know, if some part or some substantial part of that is going to go into fund balance, I mean, it offers some comfort level in terms of having money that's coming out of the education budgets become available for education special requests, even if they are paid out of fund balance. And I know the time is short on that, but boy, some rapid clarification would be great. On the municipal side, I know that Tom's three additional requests in priority are for the voting machine. It seems to me that Tom can find $1,800 without that being an additional request. I mean, I'd respectfully suggest that he withdraw that as an additional request and just take care of that. With respect to the sustainability coordinator, I think Andy's suggestion of perhaps reducing overlay, not by 100,000, but by the 48,000 needed to fund the sustainability coordinator, that might provide a funding source within our existing revenues that would not require the funding of an additional request. It does seem unlikely to me that even in the second year, we're going to see $500,000 of senior applications for that money. And, you know, if lightning strikes, we do have a reserve fund for contingencies. I have suggested to Tom Mayo that with respect to the grant writer, which I have supported for many years, that many grant writers get paid out of the grant. They get paid a percentage of what they generate, and that it is worth exploring whether a grant writer could be hired on that basis rather than as a salaried employee. And going in that direction, we could address Tom's three highest priorities. So I think, I mean, at this time of the year, we've had, I think, some of AdCom's best creative thinking. And to the extent that we can hold the line without adding to the future deficits and the amount of a future override, I'd like to see us do that. To the extent that we're left with some small amount of money that needs to be funded by fund balance, I'm reminiscent of Dan Coughlin's statement a few years ago about jumping off a 2-inch cliff. The dollars may not ultimately be all that significant in the big picture. I mean, $2 million is significant, but maybe $200,000 is not. Just my thoughts for tonight.
Thanks, Bob. Andy?
Thank you. Sue, let me ask for clarification on the fund balance memo of December 2021. With regard to education, it says a budget surplus of $1,096,000. This includes 1.3 or 1.4 million in receivables from Plymouth County CARES Act. Is that money reflected someplace other than in the?
It's a receivable. So once we get it, it will go against the receivable. It will not go into fund balance at all. It's already in fund balance. And we haven't gotten that money yet anyway.
All right, so when you get the 1.3, I guess 200,000 has to go back to the school department because it says here the budget surplus is 111. Is that? So if you.
Nothing is going to go back to the school department unless it was anything that was in FY22. But it's not. So.
Okay. So what does it mean when you say budget surplus of, let's say 1.1? This includes 1.4 in receivables.
Well, what's that say? That's saying, Andy, without the Plymouth CARES Act money,
Yeah,
the school would have been in a deficit.
but with it, they provide this
Yes.
budget surplus.
Yes.
And of that, John is saying the only thing that he can encumber is 350,000 for the special ed reserve, right?
No, that's not what he's saying. He's taking a surplus of this year and
Oh,
putting it
okay,
into
I'm
the
sorry,
special
you're
ed.
absolutely right. Yeah, I'm talking, that's fiscal 20,
21 is all done and
21.
gone. You can't do anything with 21 money.
okay. The other question, and thank you for clearing that up.
You're welcome.
I don't know if this is the time to ask this question or not, but given the number of letters we've received in support of the sustainability director position, and let's say, for lack of a better one, the art director position at the schools, do we anticipate that somebody's going to get up at town meeting and move to amend the budgets? And what do we do then?
Well, if they do that, then it has to come from a source, right, Sue?
Yes. And we were trying to figure out if anyone can increase. I don't know if you can increase.
Whether you can increase the expenditures in Article 6?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not sure, but I think you have to have a funding source.
So, okay, so if you did increase them, you would have to come up with a funding source, so you would still end up with a balanced budget,
Yeah, you have to have a balanced budget.
right?
I thought we talked last year, though, that you could use fund balance as the source, unassigned fund balance too, right?
Yeah, as long as you have to cite a source, yes.
Right, okay, so if they were savvy enough to know that, they could claim that.
They are savvy enough to know that, by the
No,
way.
I'm sure I know they are. Dave. I know they are, Dave Lane. Sorry.
Okay, Dave, you had a response for the school budget question that Bob posed, right?
I did, just quickly, Bob, thanks. You're right. I eagerly await my report too. But I honestly, given this timeline, I'm struggling to see how the school committee will be making any real decisions certainly between now and tomorrow night. And I'm a little bit hard pressed, given that Carrie is in Europe, to see they can't even post a meeting. I mean, maybe they do it on an emergency basis. So I had promised Julie that we would vote tomorrow on this budget. So we'll do our best, but suffice it to say that I tried today to try to get a little bit more clarity on where some of this money can be used and how. And the answer I got was not particularly helpful. It wasn't discouraging, it just wasn't useful. So I will continue to bird dog that. And as soon as I can tell you anything definitive, I will.
Dave, can I take that in moving forward? It wasn't helpful, but it wasn't useful. How did you say that? I want to actually quote you on that. In my business career, yeah.
I got a lot of those out of the last couple of days. Let me put it that way. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Dave. Brenda?
Yes, thanks. Couple things. I've done a lot of thinking since our meeting last week. Nancy, your comment that we need to take the question to the town. What is the town ready to pay for? I couldn't agree with more. And yet I think we also have provided a decent amount of information to the town. Last year's advisory committee report was pretty crystal clear that if an override was coming and that there would be no way to continue the school and municipal positions that were added last year without the override coming. It's not happening this year for reasons that we know. I think that's still arguably partly because of COVID. But at this point, the thing I think we heard loud and clear at town meeting last year is that a chunk of the town is very clear that we have to be working on climate change and we have to be working on it now. And so I think we did hear from the voters about that. The big picture, we all will be wrestling with in the next chunk of time. So I just want to say to you all, I really appreciate that I hear people tonight sort of trying to parse through this, trying to figure out what bits and pieces of money may come in somewhere, because I think that is our responsibility to be willing to look at those different choices and not to say it's going to be a tough, impossible to sort of make decisions. So I appreciate that people are doing that. The sort of last two things I want to say. I'm sure there's a business model for this, which I don't happen to know since that's not my world. What I know is the model of families. And what I found myself thinking about is the analogy of a family that is putting together every penny they can to eventually buy a house to house their family well and move on to the next phase of life. And they end up with one of those moments where you discover that your kid has something going on that you don't understand. It's going to cost a lot of money to deal with it. But if you don't deal with it, say it's something like a vision issue that gets in the way of learning to read. If you don't deal with it now, you've got a kid that is going to have trouble reading, is going to have trouble learning all the things that you need to learn later once you become a reader. You have a kid that may have trouble on the playing field with eye-hand motor coordination that will impact then all of their ability to engage with other kids in normal ways. And you end up with ripple effects that just keep building. And from my point of view, that's what climate change is about at this point. And I think that's what a lot of people in town are thinking, that if we don't get working on it now, the problem becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it becomes even harder for us to balance things. So the analogy of if you've got a hole and you're shoveling, stop digging, I think it also goes the other way. If we are throwing carbon into our atmosphere and and there is currently no way to take it back out again, then if we keep shoveling and don't stop shoveling that part, we definitely make life difficult for us. So I encourage us to keep thinking about if there's any way that we can fund the sustainability coordinator, because I think it needs to happen. And I think a lot of people in town are ready to pay for it in the override next year. So, and I guess, anyway, so I think those are the points I wanted to make. So thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. Daveline?
Yeah, I too have been thinking a lot about our discussions last week. And in fact, I went back and watched our last 3 budget discussions, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but I wanted to hear everyone again. So I have several comments I want to make, and sort of having done all of that. But the first thing I want to talk about, I just want to say this because having been on Capitol, I see this so clearly from the school department. So they learned last night they had $1.7 million that they didn't realize they had. It's going to be spent by the end of the fiscal year. I mean, I think particularly given that they got a smaller allotment of capital than normal, just because there were other things that were higher priorities, and they by law can move around and spend it however they want. So I think I heard John Ferris say tonight they have some capital needs they'll look at. They're going to go look at the van leasing issue for special ed transportation. And so I just think that that money's going to be there at the end that we can do something with. That may be how they fund some of those things they didn't get as additional requests, not the personnel ones. So anyway, but what I wanted to say, in terms of the budget more generally, I think it's 3 points to make. And the first is, it seems to me our job as members of the advisory committee is to represent the citizens of the town. That doesn't just mean the voters, although we sort of talk a lot about voters. And when we do this, I think we have to figure out what the town needs. And in doing that, I guess I'm reacting negatively to the let's fund everything or let's fund nothing. Because what it seems to me both of those things is sort of a reaction that doesn't look at what the needs of the town itself might be. So I think we have to actually come to some understanding about what's in the town's best interest. Second, there was a lot of discussion in going back over these, meetings, if you're in a hole, you have to stop digging. Now, Andy may not like this, but I'm going to bring up my sort of Kentucky experience. We have a lot of farmers in my family. And sometimes when you're stuck in a hole, you have to dig the hole a little deeper to get out. And we know already we are going to use some of fund balance to balance the budget. That we know. So the question is, how much of it are we going to use? And we know next year there's going to have to be an override. So the question is it sensible or reasonable or critically important to spend a little more money this year in those additional requests in order to make our situation better? So when I look at our budget, I don't think we have an expense problem. We have a revenue problem. I mean, that, in fact, we keep seeming to think we probably could use more expenses, but at any rate, so when I look at the special requests, I'm looking at them from that perspective of where the revenue is. So if I look at the town administrator's first three priorities, I support funding them. There might be somewhere Tom could come up with that $1,875, but I remember capital outlay a couple of years ago funding basically the equivalent thing for the election. So to find that there are these kinds of funding in budget isn't unusual. But what I do know is this is a big election year in the Commonwealth. So it's the congressional election, the primary in September, and then all of the statewide offices. And it's really important that the election functions efficiently. And for God's sake, it's $1,875. So that seems to be a no-brainer, and it is his number one priority. The sustainability coordinator at $48,000, I think, just following what Brenda said, climate change is the one thing. We are already getting all these reports that we are farther behind than we thought, that we are in more trouble than we thought. So I think if we look at what, can 3 extra policemen make a big difference right now? Is that critical? No, I don't think it is. Is this position? Yes. And in fact, in thinking about this, it seems to me this position, along with the grant writer, which I would also support, will have capability of producing revenue for the town. So I spent some time yesterday. I clearly need a life and need to find other things to do with my time. But I decided to go look at some of the information that's coming out of, for example, the Department of Energy that relates to the infrastructure and jobs bill. So, so that was fascinating to do. So I learned there's $25 billion for energy technology projects. That's 25 billion, a B. There's also all kinds of other things. There's money. I thought this was interesting in terms of Hingham Light, and I see Laura's on the call in the audience. Because there's money being set aside to actually make sure our electrical grid is more secure from disasters, both climate and terrorism. And so I was reading it, doing exactly, I think, what we're doing with the Hingham Light project we heard about last week. So it seems to me, so the question is, for that and for the grant writer position, there has to be somebody who can actually go look and find how that money is going to get allocated, who's going to apply for those grants. And what I see at Town Hall is people have a lot of work to be doing that are working, and they don't have time to take more things on. So if we don't fund those 2 positions, I think we actually will end up leaving money on the table, because we're not going to find access to the grants, apart from the moral issue of climate change. I won't even go into the morality here for the moment, but it seems to me those 2 positions have the potential of bringing money into the town. Now, my final point about that issue is those 3 requests total $89,875. I mean, so I would use unassigned fund balance to fund those 3 things. Now I know Julie's question. So what about the schools? All right. So I'd give the schools $89,875 too, and they can spend it however they want, which is what they will do anyway, because that's how their budget works. So that's what I would do. So now we're at $179,750. I'm comfortable with that. The big additional requests are in the police and fire department. And frankly, as much as I support both of those departments, we just gave them a ton of money. We gave them a ton of money. I mean, assuming town meeting approves all this, their capital requests were huge. I mean, it's the big year for, again, more hybrid police cars, more police vests, all these things. So they're already getting a big substantial part of the budget. So to hold off on additional positions, I think makes sense. Finally, there was one other thing from watching these again. I realize I'm getting a little, this is why you shouldn't watch it. So you get a little fired up at having seen all of these things. There was a lot of discussion about putting these issues before the voters and letting the voters decide. And I have to say at a certain point, this just got really annoying to me for this reason. Who is that sitting on the floor of town meeting? They're voters. Now, maybe election voters somehow are more important. If you go to the polls to vote, we should think more about those people. But when our budget gets approved at town meeting, that's voters. It reached a point last week in listening to these discussions again, it was almost like we were deciding the budget and the town meeting voters had nothing to do with it. And that's not true. And in fact, I suspect, given what happened last year about the public safety building, if we don't fund the sustainability director, I would fully expect there will be a motion on the floor. Because if we've learned anything, this town is committed to climate action. So I guess that's the other thing. And if it's, well, we can't make these kind of big decisions. We decided to buy a water company at town meeting. That wasn't voted on by the voters, those mythical voters that seem to be more important. So when people vote at town meeting, they are, in fact, approving what we have recommended. So anyway, that's it. Thank you for listening. Sorry to get a little fired up, but if you want to go watch all those here, it's only about 7.5 hours. So anyway,
Well,
thank you.
Thank you for your efforts to remind us of what we were talking about in these last as many meetings, and I appreciate it. I will also add that I don't want to take away anyone's talk about what they would recommend, but for your just FYI, the select board voted to recommend adding the poll pad for the elections, the sustainability coordinator, and then the part-time office assistant for the DPW. So that total is, and they're still discussing the school budget. 76,240. Is that what you got?
So it's like watching CNN.
Julie, sorry, does that mean they affirmatively did not vote for the grant writer?
Correct. And I mean, I would just note that we have extra capacity in the town administrator's office this year with the addition of the assistant town administrator for operations, Art Robert, and who I understand does have grant writing experience. So, maybe they took that into account. I'm not sure. I will have to go back. I'll get the link.
What does that mean though, if Tom took it into account and made it still his number 3 priority?
Well, because we've been talking about it for years. Advisory committee has been talking about
I'm
this for
sorry.
years.
I meant that as humorous.
Okay. All right. Well,
Galen, I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah. So anyway,
All
Evan.
right, I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. All right, so you're gonna need to give me a minute here because I have a question and then I think a couple of statements. I thought I heard in last week's, it was last week, maybe Tuesday or Thursday, I can't remember. Was it Tom or somebody described Tom Mayo as the town administrator, as kind of the CEO of the town? Am I correct in that? Did I hear that right?
I think we heard that, yeah.
Okay, cheers. Thank you. Okay. So here's how I feel about where we are with the budget this year. 2 years in a row, the town administrator, who's the CEO of the town, and the select board have made choices not to suggest an override for whatever reason. I'm not going to go through history. So I kind of feel like for our deliberative body this year, we should not necessarily suggest, and I'm going to floor a number of you right now, any new positions that have come through us this year, because I feel that if either the town or the schools feel that they need these positions, they will either figure it out through the existing budget they have or come to us for a reserve fund transfer at some point during the year as the CEO of the town, because they felt strongly from a leadership standpoint that the town needed this role or this money added to the budget. And I've been on the advisory committee for 5 years now, and we haven't voted down a single reserve fund transfer. So keep me honest. We always say yes every time they come through.
Yes.
Okay.
Unfortunately,
Okay, at least for the time when you and I sat next to each other in the beginning to this very moment where I'm in a hotel room in North Carolina. So I guess I feel really strongly this year is that we can't have this circular kind of existence where nobody has the courage to recommend in this year that we go for an override, which we know we desperately need. And yet then we are the folks who are kind of the ones to determine whether or not people get more or less than they had last year. And I truly feel like after watching the way the town government machine works, that if those leaders, and we need leaders now more than ever, choose to make a choice that says, we're going to hire a sustainability coordinator or a grant writer or, you know, whatever the schools think they need at this very point in time, then they do that. And they come to us and suggest, you know, that we, until we choose to increase the overall levy and reset the available funds we have to pay our bills, that we do that. And so I really struggle with the continued position I feel that the advisory committee's put in is to kind of, you know, weigh all these things individually and try to make decisions, where I think those decisions need to be made by the people whose responsibility it is to, you know, execute those things in the town, whether it be the municipal side or the school side. So that's what I have to say this evening.
Thanks, Evan. Kristen?
I think I'm still having a hard time with the additional money from the school. I agree with Dave Aline, that money is not coming back to fund balance because they have the ability to spend it, unlike on the municipal side. If it's not spent for your specific purpose that you asked it for, it needs to be turned back. That's different on the education side, I believe. So they have the ability to spend it on a lot, basically whatever they want this year. So I don't see that coming back. I have an issue with $800,000 of fund balance being put towards tennis courts this year when there's $1.76 million sitting in the education's money. Whereas that $800,000 in fund balance could be used to support some of these asks for this year that are necessary. And that money could be used by the school. That's the money that those tennis courts are going to be used by the school. They should be paying for that and shouldn't be coming out of fund balance. So I have a real problem with that. I don't know if that is going to change at all, but I think that needs to be reevaluated rather than the school just looking to spend money just to spend money and not turning it back. I agree that we need to look at some of these positions on a position by position basis and agree with what others have said that the sustainable budget director needs to be put into place. There's been so much support for that, and I can just see it being an issue at town meeting, and it's not big money that we're looking for here. So I support that. And I think that's about it. I mean, I also on the school side, you know, we've gotten a lot of letters about the arts director, and I I do feel for that too. I just have a hard time giving more money to the school right now when they have this large amount of money that they're sitting on. But just my opinion.
So Julie, can I just ask a question? Because Kristen makes an excellent point, and I know I don't have my hand up.
Yeah,
But
that's fine.
if the school's going to turn back a significant amount of money, and we feel really strongly they need an arts director, couldn't they hire that position now?
Well, you were at your nice client dinner and you missed the answer to that. That came up, but
Sorry.
sorry, I can't help but tease you. So the answer is that they wouldn't hire one because then they'd have to fire that person at the end of this fiscal year.
Yeah, but we'd have to fire them all next year if we don't.
They'd
an
have to
override
fire one in
anyway.
a couple months. So they're not going to find anyone to hire who's of any quality, of any substance. And it's not, an official FTE if they just put the money towards it right now. So John Ferris explained to us that basically they can't do that.
That's a weak explanation.
Well, I feel like
from my
they can do
standpoint.
it. They just won't, they don't want.
That's
to do it.
another choice, to Kristen's point, another choice, and it falls back on us, and we don't manage their operations.
I'm just giving the answer, but I
Yeah,
hear
no,
you.
I'm just, it's a BS response from them, and I'm just calling it.
All
And I
right.
think Kristen did much more eloquently than I did.
How did that
All right.
client dinner go?
It was the best I've ever had, Dave.
You sure? Doesn't
Yep.
sound like it. Man.
The best available in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Yep.
Just kidding.
Actually, the
All
food
right.
is amazing down here, by the way, just so you know.
Okay. Tina?
I don't want to belabor this because Bob, Kristen, and Evan really covered a lot of my points. But if I want to make them, I do think our job as advisory committee is to be representative of the floor of town meeting. And I think we are hearing loud and clear from the citizens about the sustainability director and the fine arts director. I think that the town is really reaching out to us, and I don't want to not hear them and not respond. I think that's important. I was surprised by the pushback from the school committee on using one-time money to fund a recurring operational position. And even hearing that it was, I actually wrote it down, that is not a responsible way to budget. And well, I have to agree with that. So I also heard Mary Power mention that if we make this operational override too large next year, I mean, if we were to say add all of these positions and the operational override started at $7.8 million before we did a strategic plan for the schools, before we brought in new leadership, if we're looking at a $8 or $9 or $10 million override, we're looking at a 30 to 40% tax increase for our citizens over the next 3 years. I think that's far too large. And I completely agree with Evan that putting this on us feels very awkward. So I really would love to find a way to find the money for the sustainability director and the fine arts director. I would like to do that without using our fund balance, and I would like to work collaboratively with the town administrator and the school committee and figure out how we could do that in that way.
Thanks, Tina. Caitlin?
Thanks, Julie. It's really a question, and maybe it's more so for Sue, and kind of pulls through some of the themes that I've been hearing. One of the things that just going through this process for the first year have struggled a little bit with is when when we're looking at the budgets, the departmental budgets, we're using last year's approved budget to then assess the current year asks. But what I guess I'm used to is going off of a forecast, which would have more clarity or transparency around potential like term backs that would be known at a certain point during the year. And so I know Sue always says it's a small amount. I think we say it's about a 1% turn back that happens every year. But, and she can correct me if that's wrong, but that would be around $1 million, correct? And in terms of what Tina was just saying, how is there a potential to kind of re-baseline some of these budgets based off of what they actually spend and not trending them versus the budget year prior, in order to get some of these asks into a new baseline, if that makes sense. I'm sure I'm missing something here, but it just seems like if we use fund balance to fund some of these things, and then we get to the end of the year and we're going to be throwing more money back into fund balance that were turnbacks that potentially we could have just budgeted better to begin with and allocated it to the appropriate spot that needed it. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. Sue, do you have anything to add about that from an accounting point of view?
I can, just a couple of different points. A lot of turnbacks, especially if it's personnel, is because of vacancies. You can't forecast a vacancy. You appropriate the money and you hope, just like the school. I mean, they were having a hard time finding those 32 positions. And another thing, a lot of, like group insurance, if we have 2 basically open enrollments, one in the spring for everybody, but we also have another one in the fall for new teachers. So we do our best in forecasting the budget for those particular things. 1%, that means we are budgeting at a 99% accuracy. And I don't see how we can do much better than that.
Yeah, I totally agree, Sue. I think you guys do a great job in budgeting. I think, maybe it's a government municipal thing that you can't, budget for vacancies, but it is something that happens every year, right? And I guess where I struggle is that
Caitlin, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Can you come?
It's like
Oh,
really
sorry.
good.
You got really quiet.
Can you hear me now? I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I was
Yeah.
blocking my phone. I just said, I don't know if it's a government or a municipal thing where you can't budget for vacancy. I know like on obviously corporate finance is different, but you can budget for vacancy on the corporate side, and we do. So I just wasn't sure if that's something that, maybe something, yeah, Sue, I don't know. Is that something that you can't do on the government side on municipal finance?
Well, it is actually, I'm going to speak to, I think, I can't remember who said it. Oh, Evan, about going for a reserve fund transfer after you've already hired someone. You can't hire somebody if you don't have the appropriation. And to hire somebody without that appropriation and then come into AdCom for a reserve fund transfer for salaries for that position, I would hope everybody would say no, because it's not unanticipated. They willingly hired somebody without that appropriation. So you couldn't do that. But what we budget for, Caitlin, is every department's needs. If DPW needs, 50 people, we budget for that 50 people. The vacancies is because they can't hire someone, or if they hire someone, they don't work out and they leave, or somebody retires and then it takes a few months to get somebody else. Those are the kind of surpluses from salaries that we are getting for turnbacks.
Okay.
So Sue, you telling me I was wrong? They just can't do what they want?
I don't want to come right out and say that, but
I don't mind, Sue.
Since you said it, Evan, yeah.
But can I just on clarification on that point, and I'm saying it in a funny way, but the schools in this particular case needs arise outside of the budgeting kind of goalposts, right? The period.
Yeah.
So if they determined that during that year, they needed the fine arts director because whatever reason, they had hit a compliance
schools-
wall or whatever.
Schools can,
or-
yeah, school can do whatever they want with their pot of money. So yes, schools could do that.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And then Tom, on the flip side, if a regulation comes through that says we need to do something from an environmental perspective, he could come and say, hey, look, I know what we decided. However, as a town, we're going to be out of compliance. We're going to do these things. We really need this position right now. He could also do that.
I don't know.
Ooh,
I mean, that would
that's
first
the
have to go
least
through the-
precise you've ever been.
Yes, I know. They'd have to go through the personnel board. I'm not sure they could add a position. You know, we do have a former Board of Selectmen here.
We do?
We do.
Where?
Laura,
Laura, I don't know if you want to jump in and
I
Answer
just,
that.
I don't know if they could do that, Evan, to be honest.
or you
with
don't
you.
have to.
I'm
I'll
asking,
put you on the
Sue, I'm
spot.
asking an honest question. I don't know the answer.
Laura Burns, 479 Main Street. I don't think so.
I didn't think so either.
And I don't, the idea of also asking for a reserve fund transfer for it should not be for an ongoing expense, reserve fund transfer. So you wouldn't go that route either. I think the new position would have to wait for the new budget.
I
whatever it was.
kind of agree. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Laura.
Um,
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Julie, I don't want to cut ahead of George, but I raised my hand to kind of address this same point. So
All
could I-
right, George. George is smiling, so he doesn't look unhappy about it. Go ahead.
I will defer to the former chair of the
Is it Chair Emeritus?
chair emeritus. Yes, thank you. What did we call them? The wise men or something when they
I think
I
we can't
wouldn't
do
go-
that anymore.
You're going too far, George. You're going
Yeah.
too far.
I think the
Really?
elder statesman.
Well, I didn't say that. It was Julie.
Well, I guess
Just
following up on that, Sue, for example, and Laura. Yeah, last year, I mean, we give the school an appropriation of almost 52 million for salaries. But we don't break that appropriation down into positions. Isn't that totally up to the school?
That's what I said. The school committee can do whatever they want with their money.
And
Evan was
so-
asking about the town.
and
I'm
so-
talking about the town.
Okay. So, well, I mean, because I'm thinking about the arts director position. And if they've got, $1.7 million now and they want to hire an arts director, I think that John's suggestion that they'd have to fire that person on July 1st is very disingenuous
I
because
agree with you, Bob.
what he has is a salaries account that is paying his personnel, as I understand it. And, as the year goes on, yeah, he's going to have vacancies here and there. He is probably going to pick up some slack in that account. And it doesn't seem to me that he has to fire anybody or any particular person until such time as he realizes that his salaries account is not going to cover salaries through the end of FY23. Is that an accurate statement?
No, because they don't have to, on the town side.
No, we're
Our-
just talking.
No, I know, I'm trying to explain something. On the town side, our salaries cannot go in the negative. The
Right.
schools can take expense money and put it to salaries anytime they want. The town side cannot do that.
Okay, so
They
John
have
has,
full autonomy of taking the $60 million and spending it on one thing if they actually wanted to.
so.
Like a big
until-
party or
Hey,
something.
can I jump in front of Bob since he jumped in front of George? Just so.
I still haven't gone yet.
I know.
Hang on.
What about George? To
It's
remind
in
you
this
all.
topic. it's
It's
in
a
the topic, and
hashtag.
I tried to take John Ferris down this road and he refused to go. And so Sue, help me understand, what is the difference between him? What is the difference between them funding this with the 1.7 and us funding it for them out of fund balance?
They want to blame us for the fact they don't have.
Well, wait, I just
that
want
they have-
Sue's
no, they-
opinion. Is
I
it-
just want to
is
say
it
they want to
even
blame
legal?
us for the fact that they haven't
Okay.
hired a fine arts
Sue?
director.
Go ahead, Sue.
Like he said, Nancy, he forecasts a 1.7. We don't know what's going to happen between now and June 30th. And like everybody, 3 or 4 people said, they're not going to turn back 1.7. They're going to find other ways to use it. And they're really,
Arts director is 1% of that.
yes,
But he can't use that for next year's operating expenses.
no, he can't. It's going to go to fund balance.
That's the difference. I mean, he can't, if he doesn't spend it this year, it comes back to fund balance. He can't
But-
put it in an account. Well, they do stash a lot of money in their various revolving accounts, but apart from, if they don't do that, then he can't create an account that says this is for the salary for the
No,
art
but
director for
my
next year.
question to Sue is, if he, suppose he went and hired a fine arts director today,
Now, yep,
right? He uses, now he's gonna use $20,000 out of that $1.7 million.
Yep.
Now he's got a fine arts director.
yep.
Now he goes in, he buys less paper clips, or he gets half to fund something in technology that he was normally spending some other way.
And can keep that person.
Next year.
Next year.
Yes, exactly,
Oh, sure, he could do that.
exactly.
So that's kind of my point, is what is I don't understand. I mean, the shell game with the money is just kind of crazy. Let's use it to
Exactly.
our advantage.
Well, that's why it's so annoying to get these
Okay.
letters that people say we need.
Julie,
an
get
Okay.
control of this.
Let's just get back. We need to refocus. It's getting late. We still have lots of people to hear from. I will tell you the news that the select board voted to add to the budget the fine arts director, basically, well, $120,000. So it's
To pay for out of fund balance.
so. Yeah. George?
Thank you, Julie. And let's see, everybody's on mute. That's good. I just have a couple of thoughts, and I'm going to repeat some things that other people have already said. And I guess I want to start with, and I forget who said it, but I view our role as representing all of the town, not a specific interest group, but all of the town. And we have heard lately, and it seems like really in the last 2 or 3 days, we have heard from a number of very passionate, well-organized people. We have received virtually the same email. So the template has been sent out to various groups, and they have sent it in to us saying, support this position, support that position, spend this money, do whatever. So we've been hearing from a minority of the voters in the town, and they're passionate people, and they're interested in their specific causes, and that's understandable. But we do have to keep in mind that there's an awful lot of people in the town that we have not yet heard from. The positions that have been advocated for, either via these letters or emails or in various meetings and things, they're probably all very well worthwhile. And I'm not going to opine on which ones we should hire or which ones we shouldn't hire or whatever. I'm a city boy, So I'm not a farmer. But I know that when I would take my kids when they were little to the beach, and they would take their pail and their shovel, and they would start digging their hole. Eventually, the hole would cave in on them. So I'm not quite sure I'm following Develine's logic about digging the hole deeper to get yourself out of the hole. I find when you dig the hole too deep, it just caves in on you. I have a hard time saying to myself, convincing myself that we should be digging this hole deeper. We have already created an IOU from the taxpayers. And at some point, we're going to come to the ballot box and they're going to be asked to say yay or nay to that. And I'm not real comfortable that we as an advisory committee should be making that IOU bigger. I don't know where we have that responsibility or that authority to make that hole bigger, to make that ask bigger, to go to the voters next April and say, hey, we need X millions dollars, because if we don't get it, we're going to lay all these people off. And I think that's a terrible position to put the voter into. And the other, or the last point that I would make on this is that, Develin, you're right. We go to the town and we ask them to vote a budget, and they're sitting there. Those are the voters, and they vote the budget. That's correct. But we're not asking them to raise their taxes at that point. We're just asking them to approve a budget that really is not going to impact their taxes whatsoever. What we're doing at this point in time, and what we're going to be doing next spring, is saying, we need you to raise your taxes. And it's going to be a substantial increase in taxes, not only for the override, but for the debt exclusions that are coming this fall. And I'm real uncomfortable with making that hole any bigger than it already is, notwithstanding the fact that I think the positions that are being advocated for are very worthwhile. I just think that until we have a sustained source of funding for these positions, we really need to hold the line and say, it's just unreasonable to the voter, in my opinion. So that's all I have.
Thanks, George. I'm going to ask if there are any AdCom members who haven't spoken yet tonight who want to speak. If you want to jump in, I'll let you cut the line because it's just chaos tonight, or not. We can go back to the lineup of hands. You don't have to, but okay. Evan?
I just want to say, George, what you just said was really well said. And I've listened to what you said, what Daylene said, and what Tina said. The one thing that I want to just kind of clarify is, and I've observed this for 5 years now. Tina, you kind of mentioned, Mary Power has said, well, we're going to make a big number and people aren't going to vote for it. Unfortunately, I think we've had this narrative that we won't take tax increases and we won't override. And we've had it for as long as I've been on AdCom. And unfortunately, the 15 of us are the ones kind of stuck staring down that barrel. So I think it's a little disingenuous for prior leaders to share their opinion about where we are now, since they're not necessarily the ones having to deal with it. And I do think that we talk about whether the hole gets bigger or the number gets larger next year. And I know we didn't want to put a override together this year for fear that it would fail. It could fail next year, and the number could be quite large. So the heads we are cutting could be significant, right? If, to George's point, we're only hearing from a vocal minority. And I don't necessarily think it's our job to make that decision. I think that's the select board, and I think it's the town administrator or the town CEO, as he referred himself to. And I really am disappointed with kind of past decisions that have been made to let us where we are now, because it just makes the job harder. So I would agree with almost everything everyone said tonight in various ways, shapes, and forms. And I'm tired of this narrative that Hingham doesn't do overrides and we don't take tax increases, because, to George's point, all we hear from people who either join this call or send emails through Sue is that they want this position or that position or the full school budget supported, et cetera. So I do think at some point we need to let the people whose choice it actually is, and that's the folks in this town, and I'm one of them, and I will go there and I will vote with my citizen hat versus my AdCom hat for what I kind of feel like is the right thing to do. But I think that we need to put it in the hands of the people's whose responsibility it actually is to make this happen. And that's each and every one of us as kind of residents of this town. So, sorry, Julie, I won't raise my hand again tonight, I promise.
7. Andy?
I had pretty much given up my advocacy of very aggressive use of fund balance, but I've been kind of talked around back into it by listening tonight to the people who are espousing the urgency of some of the positions. Let me add parenthetically that with regard to the school department, as we all acknowledge, we give them this large check and they decide what their priorities are. And they have decided for the last several years that an art director is not one of their priorities. For some reason, their constituents don't seem to appreciate that it's the school department that makes that decision, not us. And so we keep getting these redundant letters, fully fund this education department budget because we need, among other things, an art director. And we have, we could double their budget and we still can't promise anybody they're going to get an art director next year. So the school budget is a whole different animal. And I'm interested to hear the ACEs. We keep saying tomorrow night, but I think it's Thursday night, right? We hear ACEs Thursday.
ACEs is tomorrow. ACEs is tomorrow.
Tomorrow, Wednesday.
Their meeting is tomorrow, Wednesday. Yep, at 8 p.m.
No.
Right, Dave?
Is that, yeah, but when do ACEs present to us?
Oh, and then they'll come and, sorry, I misunderstood. Yes, and then they'll come tell us all about it on Thursday.
Yeah, okay, because I'll have some questions probably then. But to get back to my other point, with regard to the fund balance, the average, there are two large components to this. One is the excess, I'm repeating myself, I apologize, the excess of actual revenues over estimated revenues. On average, from 2011 through 2021, that has been $1.7 million a year. The second component is the excess of I should say, the budget surpluses, which are the amount of turnbacks, the amount by which the municipal budgets, the education budget, I guess, the amount by which the budgets proposed exceed the amounts actually expended. On average, from 2011 through 2021, that has been $1.9 million a year. So that's $3.6 million. Now, Sue will point out that we need $2 million of that anyways for unforeseen requests or reserve fund transfers during the year. That could well be. But the point I'm getting at is we start off with $30 million in the fund balance account. I recognize that, in excess of 20% is the 12 million. 20%, of course, is the maximum amount that our policy says we should have in fund balance, unassigned fund balance. And I suppose that number may be cast in concrete because that's perhaps come to be a number relied upon by the rating agency. So it may be that we can't dip below 20%, but there is still enough money in fund balance to cover some number of the additional requests.
Yes,
Easily,
and those are recurring expenses though.
I understand, but what we're talking about is, in my thinking, a bridge to an override. Everything goes to hell in a handbasket if we do not get an override next year. There will be substantial number of layoffs. So what we're trying to do is figure out the budget and to balance it this year, knowing full well that we could spend no fund balance this year and we still get nowhere next year if we don't get an override. So I'm talking about using fund balance as a bridge to an override for fiscal 24 and picking and choosing which of the additional requests we have been persuaded have considerable urgency. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Brenda?
A couple of things that I had meant to say before, but didn't manage to get out. As the liaison from Climate Action Planning, I wanted to let everybody know that tonight the select board did approve the signing of the contract with the consultant that the Climate Action Planning Committee has chosen to help them with preparing the first steps of our climate plan. They expect that the carbon inventory for the town and for the beginnings of that plan to exist by September. And I think part of the question is, do we think our town wants us to do nothing with that information till July of next year, or do they want to start to act on it this year? Just to let you know that that's sort of the latest news on that end. I thought the same thing as Kristen mentioned, that the $894,000 going to the tennis courts at the high school and out of fund balance at this point. If we're squeamish about how much is going to stay in fund balance and whether we're protected and whether we have a cover of the things that we need, is that a place that would be willing to say, let's not spend that out of fund balance this year until we know what our whole picture looks like going forward? And or is maybe that's something that we could work out with the schools, given their 1.7 million, as Kristen said, maybe that would be a use of that. But that's the other thing I wanted to mention. Thank you. Oh, finally, it's clear we are going to have a money problem here in town for a good chunk of time. So the infrastructure costs to adapting, both mitigating climate change, already existing impacts, as well as the infrastructure changes needed to reduce our carbon output. We're going to have trouble coming up with money for that in the near future. So to me, that's why the grant writer position makes a whole lot of sense to be paying attention to, because we need help for funding the things that are going to need to happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. Tina?
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to clarify my remarks about an override for when Evan spoke. It occurred to me. So we've been in town for 27 years and we have seen some pretty large debt exclusion projects, and we have seen operational overrides. The one most recently done was for the schools. And those were very vocal meetings. And people like Mary Power and Nancy, Christine Smith did huge lifts to go out and really socialize these to the town. I believe, Evan, 100% that Hingham is willing to do overrides, and I am supportive of the idea of overrides. But going through the process, I mean, I think that we don't all understand how much work it takes to get support for an override at town meeting. it's not something that you easily go to the town and suggest that in order to fund the budget that we have, we need to do this. It's a heavy, heavy lift. We're going to need that same lift for the Foster School project. We need an advocacy group to do that. We brought that up with Ray. And I think we're going to need an advocacy group to support the public safety facility building. There was a huge advocacy campaign behind the water company, and we remember how contentious that town meeting was. So my concern with the override is that the larger it becomes, the larger the effort required to socialize it, educate the town, and get people to support it. And I have yet to see the group raising their hand to say, hey, we're going to be the ones to carry the flag for this override. Anyone who's been through all this stuff can correct me if I'm wrong, but none of these passed without a tremendous group doing the hard work to get the town to believe it, understand it, and support it. So that is why every time we talk about making it larger and larger, I get more and more concerned about whether or not it will pass. I do believe we can pass an override. I think we just have to be really thoughtful about how large it is, what we put in it, and how we present it.
Thanks, Tina. Anyone have anything else to add tonight? Any advisory committee members? I know we have some folks here in the audience who may want to speak, but any AdCom members? Sarah?
Just really briefly, for the record, exercising my right to actively listen the last two meetings. I promised myself in my first year I would listen more than talk. I really appreciate all the comments. I feel like I'm thinking about this all the time. And it's all really resonating with me. So thanks everyone for your thoughts.
Sure thing. All right, well, good discussion. Basis will meet tomorrow night. We'll go from there. But do any guests here in the meeting want to say anything? Laura.
Laura Burns, 479 Main Street. I will be extremely brief because when I was chair of the advisory committee, we had a rule which was there is no good advisory committee after 11. So I wanted to say that I heard the override. I heard the report of the advisory committee last year, and it very clearly said to me, correct me if I'm wrong, there will be an override this year. And I feel for your position really deeply because you guys don't get to decide that. And I think it was a large mistake not to follow through on that statement. It puts you in a really tough position. And when 36 positions were funded unsustainably last year, that is the source of your problem this year. And you guys are stuck. I feel terrible about that. I would though like to say that I think that that it's a leader's job to listen to the people who speak up. When I served on the select board, there was one time when a group of citizens came in with a petition about something, a lot of signatures, and handed it to the chair, who shall remain nameless, who refused to take it. And I had a real problem with that because the fact that the majority of people in town don't speak up about things is not a good reason for not listening to the people who do, because we live here and we care. So the real thing I wanted to tell you, which is not that much help to you, but I will tell you that State Rep Joe Moschino has agreed to seek an earmark for the sustainability coordinator position. And there's a good reason to think it might be granted, because several towns have gotten earmarks for that in the last couple of years, that very thing, first year of a sustainability position. And also ours is a regional position, which makes it even more attractive to the legislature. So I think there's a good chance that will happen. Unfortunately, it doesn't help you at all because you won't know about that until August, maybe June, not until after town meeting for sure. And then it's going to be a position in the budget and you'll have 1 year of it and it will need to be funded again next year. But I did wanted to let you know that. And thanks for your time.
Thanks, Laura. Bob?
As the author of the advisory committee's report last year, I don't think the report said that there would be an override this year, but I think the report indicated that an override was highly probable.
Yeah, let's just say that's what I took away from it. And maybe that was your intent.
And like you, I am disappointed that it did not happen this year, but that's ancient history at this point. So, and it's after 11, so I'm waiting to make my motion to adjourn.
Second.
Yeah. Well, all right. I just got to tell you a couple more things. I mean, we just have a quick housekeeping thing. So that wraps up our budget discussion for tonight.
And thank you, Laura, for
Thank you
that.
all for your time. Thank you, Laura and John, for joining us tonight. And it's always good. We appreciate, I appreciate the advocacy, and I think it's important to hear from people. So thank you. So I just wanted to warrant process update. Just we're in the last stages of wrapping up warrant articles, so you don't need to hear that again. Discussion of advisory committee housekeeping items. We are meeting on Thursday. We are going to have to take up AAA, the gender neutral bylaw article, just to fix the recommended motion. So that should take no time. Then we are going to hear and vote, if possible, Article BBB, requirements for accessory uses. And then we're going to take up the report of the Personnel Board, salaries of town officers. Bob, I meant to email you today and I forgot to. So that's your article. Hopefully you're all set with that. And then budgets. We'll have a discussion about the budget. We'll hear from Dave and ACES about their recommendations, and we will go through, if possible, we will go through line by line the budget and vote on it. I'll try to make it as streamlined as possible so it's not painful.
Is that Thursday?
Next Tuesday
Julie?
we have, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not
2
gonna
days
be
from
here that day.
Is that Evan talking?
Yeah.
Oh, you're not gonna be here. Okay.
And Julie,
Okay.
we vote on each department, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The line item for its expenses and salaries for each department, and what will I'll read through, and then if anyone has a hold on it, we'll just hold, and then we'll vote for the whole thing, and then we go to the additional requests from
Okay.
there.
So just as a matter of process, if we object to if we vote no in a specific department, that's also then something we can record our vote as a no, is that correct? We've never seen, we've
Yes,
not
so-
seen this before. Okay, I just wanted to check on the process.
So yeah, if you vote no on an individual budget item, individual category, well, yeah, I think so.
I mean, it seems like it
That's
would be
part
the
of-
same way as it is for anything else we vote on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tina?
How do we vote the additional requests?
We're go through the list. We have the list of additional requests, and we will. I'm gonna go back and look at my notes from last year, Bob. I will be prepared, but I'm trying
Okay.
to. I wrote notes on. I went back to the tape for last year, but I can't think of it right now. I'm sorry.
Okay. But
Well,
it's sort of- got it.
Let's check in tomorrow, Julie.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Julie, I think historically, at least in my tenure, we've never gone through the additional requests on the school side. Typically, ACES gives a number, but this year may be a
Yeah.
little bit different, just given the circumstances. So, yeah, I mean, maybe you and I can talk about that too. I just haven't because someone pointed out tonight properly that whereas we can go through the municipal line items and fund projects, we can't do that on the school side with any, not that it's bad faith, but if we say this is for this, there's no requirement that it be so.
Yeah, I mean, on capital outlay, we fund specific things the school has asked for. And then the next year they come in and tell us how they didn't do the things we funded. They did other things, and they're perfectly able to do that under law. So.
Yeah, I think school this year is going to be, well, we'll take it one step at a time. We'll see where ACES comes out and we can go from there.
Okay. But we have to meet next Tuesday, and I'm setting it up so we can hear jointly articles with the planning board and the select board. To have the planning board present articles CCC and DDD. And if we aren't ready to vote on CCC and DDD on Tuesday, and if there's any articles left, then we will have to meet on Thursday.
Just to give you a heads up, Julie, the recommended motion on Article CCC will probably be 16 to 18 pages. Now,
okay,
I say that only
sorry
to tell you that we'll probably be relying heavily on the recommendation or the approval of the planning board. And
okay,
now a lot of that is because of reorganization and word clarification. That is tedious to go through, but not substantively significant.
okay. Well, thank you for your efforts in that article. And now, is that Matt's article?
We're working on it together. We have a threesome. We have Matt, Brenda, and myself have decided that we would triple team articles, triple C and triple D.
Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you. And we're moving forward with the assumption that town meeting will be held on Saturday, April 30th. And the only other thing that I would mention, just to keep your spirits high, is that we are going to have the advisory committee annual party again this year. And that's when we all get together and we invite town department heads and committee members to come celebrate our success. And that will be in June. And Matt, I don't know if you got an official email back from the Heritage Museum.
I've emailed them twice, starting on February 28th. Haven't heard anything back. I gave them the priority, the dates, June 11th, 12th, or 5th in that order, but I haven't heard back. And I'll start lobbing phone calls in tomorrow.
I'll see what I can
The other night I asked Mrs. Anderson.
Yeah,
I
I'll give it a
texted Mrs.
shot. I like
Anderson
my
the other
chances.
night.
I think we have some polls.
And the 11th.
Not as much as you might
The
think,
11th is
George.
apparently, the 11th is apparently open to us for our use. And so that would be June 11th from 5 to 7 p.m. at the Hingham Heritage Museum.
If Laura Burns painted that mural behind her, I'd nominate her for art director of the school system.
Oh, God.
Hey, Matt, Mrs. Anderson
Okay.
got back to me the first time. You want some help?
Thanks.
Watch it.
All right, so that's it for housekeeping items, unless anyone has anything else. Can matters not anticipated within 48 hours of meeting?
Move to
Can I have a
adjourn.
motion to adjourn, please?
Second.
Second.
All right, Bob,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Nancy? Nancy's an aye. I think she's nodding. Okay, Dave,
Aye.
Evan,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Daveline,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
Kristen? Aye. Tina,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Caitlin? I don't know if she can hear me, Caitlin. Oh, yeah. Sarah,
Aye.